Hello, everyone. Today we're going to talk about something that affects every single moment of your existence, your emotions. But more specifically, we're going to talk about how to master them using the ancient wisdom of Stoicism. Now, before you roll your eyes and think this is about becoming some emotionless robot, let me be clear. This isn't about suppressing your emotions or pretending they don't exist. This is about understanding what emotions actually are, where they come from, and most importantly, how you can take control of them instead of letting them control you. Because here's the uncomfortable truth that most people refuse to acknowledge. You are probably a slave to your emotions. When someone cuts you off in traffic, you automatically get angry. When you see your ex with someone new on social media, you automatically feel jealous. When your boss criticizes your work, you automatically feel hurt or defensive. You react to these situations as if you have no choice, as if your emotional responses are as inevitable as gravity. But what if I told you that this is completely false? What if I told you that every single emotional reaction you have is actually a choice you're making, even if you're not aware of it? What if I told you that the ancient Stoics discovered a method for emotional freedom that's so powerful it can transform your entire experience of life? The Stoics understood something about emotions that most people today completely miss. They understood that emotions are not things that happen to you, they are things that you do. They are judgments you make about external events, and because they are judgments, they can be changed. Let me start with a quote from Epictetus that gets to the heart of everything we're going to discuss today. What disturbs people's minds is not events, but their judgment on events. Think about that for a moment. It's not the thing that happens to you that causes your emotional suffering. It's your judgment about what happened. This might sound abstract, so let me give you a concrete example. Imagine you're walking down the street and someone you know walks right past you without saying hello. Now, what emotion do you feel? Most people would say they feel hurt, maybe a little angry, perhaps confused. But here's the thing. The event itself, someone walking past you, is completely neutral. It's just a person moving their body through space. The hurt you feel doesn't come from their action. It comes from your judgment about their action. You might think, they ignored me on purpose, or they don't like me anymore, or they're being rude. These are judgments, interpretations you're adding to a neutral event. And it's these judgments that create your emotional response, not the event itself. Now, you might say, but wait, maybe they really were being rude. Maybe they really don't like me anymore. And you might be right. But here's the crucial point the Stoics make. Even if your interpretation is correct, your emotional suffering still comes from your judgment, not from their action. Think about it this way. If someone you completely didn't care about, a stranger you'd never met, walked past you without saying hello, would you feel hurt? Of course not, because you wouldn't have any expectations about their behavior. You wouldn't judge their action as meaningful to you. The hurt only comes when you judge the action as significant, as a rejection, as something that affects your sense of self-worth. This is why Epictetus says that what disturbs us is not events, but our judgments about events. The person walking past you is an event. Your interpretation that this means they don't like you is a judgment. And it's the judgment, not the event, that causes your emotional pain. Now, this insight is absolutely revolutionary because it means that you have much more control over your emotional life than you think. You can't control whether people say hello to you or not, but you can control your judgments about their behavior. You can't control whether your boss criticizes your work, but you can control your judgment about what that criticism means. But before we go deeper into how to apply this, we need to understand what emotions actually are from a Stoic perspective. The Stoics had a very specific technical understanding of emotions, and it's different from how most people think about them today. For the Stoics, emotions, which they called passions, are judgments about external things that we label as good or bad, beneficial or harmful. When you feel angry, you're not just experiencing some mysterious force that has overtaken you. You're making a judgment that something bad has happened and that you should respond with anger. When you feel anxious about the future, you're making a judgment that something bad might happen and that this possibility is worth worrying about. When you feel jealous of someone else's success, you're making a judgment that they have something good that you lack and that this is somehow harmful to you. The crucial insight here is that all of these judgments are about externals, things outside of your direct control. You're angry because someone else did something. You're anxious because something might happen in the future. You're jealous because someone else has something. But the Stoics identified a fundamental problem with emotional reactions to externals. They make your happiness depend on things you can't control. And anything you can't control is, by definition, unreliable. It can change at any moment without your permission. This brings us to one of the core Stoic principles, the dichotomy of control. There are things that are up to you, and there are things that are not up to you. The things that are up to you are your judgments, your choices, your actions, your responses. The things that are not up to you are everything else. Other people's behavior, the weather, the economy, your reputation, your health, the past, the future. Now, here's where most people make a crucial error. They try to find happiness by controlling things that are not up to them. They want other people to behave in certain ways. They want the weather to be nice. They want the economy to be stable. They want to be healthy forever. And when these things don't go according to their wishes, they suffer emotionally. The Stoics realize that this approach to life is fundamentally irrational. It's like trying to control the ocean by shouting at the waves. You're setting yourself up for constant frustration and disappointment because you're basing your emotional well-being on things that are inherently unpredictable and beyond your influence. Instead, the Stoics proposed a radical alternative. Base your happiness only on things that are actually up to you. And the most important thing that's up to you is your judgment about external events. Let me give you a practical example of how this works. Imagine you've been working on a project for months, and when you present it to your team, it gets heavily criticized. The natural emotional response might be to feel devastated, angry at your critics, or ashamed of your work. But let's apply the Stoic analysis. The criticism itself is not up to you. It's an external event. You can't control what other people think or say about your work. If you base your emotional well-being on getting positive feedback, you're making your happiness depend on something external, something not up to you. But what is up to you? Your judgment about what the criticism means. You could judge it as a devastating attack on your competence and worth as a person. Or you could judge it as useful feedback that will help you improve your work. You could judge it as evidence that you should give up, or as evidence that you're pushing boundaries and taking risks. The external event, the criticism, is the same in both cases. But your emotional response will be completely different depending on which judgment you choose to make. Now, you might object, but I can't just choose to see criticism as positive when it's clearly negative. And this brings us to a crucial point about Stoic practice. The Stoics aren't asking you to lie to yourself or to pretend that negative things are positive. They're asking you to examine your judgments more carefully and to question whether they're actually serving you. Is it actually true that criticism means you're incompetent? Or could it mean that you're learning and growing? Is it actually true that other people's opinions determine your worth? Or could it be that your worth is something internal, something that doesn't depend on external validation? The Stoics would say that most of our automatic emotional reactions are based on judgments that we've never really examined. We inherited them from our culture, our family, our past experiences, and we treat them as if they're obviously true. But when you start to examine these judgments closely, you often find that they're not as solid as you thought. Take the judgment that other people's opinions of you are extremely important. This seems obvious to most people. Of course it matters. what others think of you. But why? Is your actual value as a human being really determined by other people's opinions? If someone has a negative opinion of you because they misunderstand you, does that actually make you less valuable? If someone has a positive opinion of you because they don't know your flaws, does that actually make you more valuable? When you really think about it, the connection between other people's opinions and your actual worth starts to seem much less obvious. And if that connection isn't as strong as you thought, then criticism becomes much less emotionally devastating. This is the kind of examination that Stoic practice involves. You're not trying to convince yourself that black is white. You're trying to see through judgments that you've been making automatically, without really thinking about whether they make sense. Let me give you another example. Many people feel anxious about the future because they judge uncertainty as bad. They think they need to know what's going to happen in order to be okay. But is this judgment actually true? Is uncertainty really bad? Or is it just the natural state of life? Think about it. Every good thing that has ever happened to you came out of uncertainty. Every surprise, every opportunity, every moment of joy was uncertain before it happened. If everything in your life was completely predictable, would that actually be better? Would a life with no surprises, no possibilities, no room for anything new actually be a life worth living? When you examine the judgment that uncertainty is bad, you might find that it's not as reasonable as it seemed. Uncertainty is just the way reality works. Fighting against it is like fighting against gravity. You'll exhaust yourself without changing anything. But if you can change your judgment about uncertainty from "this is bad and I need to control it" to "this is just how life works and I can handle whatever comes," your relationship to the future becomes completely different. Instead of being a source of anxiety, uncertainty becomes a space of possibility. This is what the Stoics mean when they talk about living according to nature. They don't mean you should go live in the woods. They mean you should align your judgments with the way reality actually works, instead of demanding that reality conform to your preferences. Now, let's talk about how to actually practice this kind of emotional mastery. Because understanding the theory is one thing, but applying it in the moment when you're angry or hurt or afraid is another thing entirely. The first step is developing what the Stoics call the discipline of desire. This means training yourself to desire only what is actually up to you and to accept everything else as it comes. Most people have this backwards. They desire things that are not up to them and resist things that are up to them. For example, you might desire to be liked by everyone, which is not up to you, while resisting the effort required to become someone worth liking, which is up to you. You might desire to never experience criticism, which is not up to you, while resisting the process of learning from feedback, which is up to you. The discipline of desire means reorienting your wants and preferences toward what you can actually control. Instead of wanting other people to behave differently, you want to respond wisely to however they do behave. Instead of wanting life to be easy, you want to develop the strength to handle whatever challenges arise. This might sound like settling for less, but the Stoics would say it's actually the path to much greater satisfaction. When you desire things that are up to you, you can actually achieve what you want. When you desire things that are not up to you, you're setting yourself up for constant frustration. The second discipline is the discipline of action. This means focusing your energy on what you can actually influence rather than wasting it on what you can't. Most people spend enormous amounts of mental and emotional energy on things that are completely outside their control. They worry about what other people think of them, but they don't put effort into becoming the kind of person worthy of respect. They complain about political developments, but they don't engage in any meaningful way with the political process. They stress about economic conditions, but they don't take concrete steps to improve their own financial situation. The discipline of action means asking yourself, what can I actually do about this situation? And then doing that thing while letting go of everything else. The third discipline is the discipline of assent, which is about controlling your judgments in real time. This is perhaps the most practical and immediately useful Stoic technique. Every time something happens that triggers an emotional reaction, you have a moment, sometimes just a split second, where you can choose what to think about it. Most people let this moment pass unconsciously. They automatically accept whatever judgment pops into their head first. But with practice, you can learn to catch this moment and examine your initial judgment before you accept it. You can ask yourself, is this judgment actually true? Is it helpful? Is it about something that's up to me or not up to me? For example, if someone is rude to you, your initial judgment might be, they're disrespecting me and I need to defend myself. But if you catch this judgment and examine it, you might realize, actually their rudeness says more about them than about me. My dignity doesn't depend on how they treat me. I can choose to respond with dignity regardless of their behavior. This doesn't mean you become a doormat. It means you respond from a place of conscious choice rather than automatic reaction. You might still choose to address their rudeness, but you'll do it from a place of strength rather than emotional reactivity. The key to developing this skill is practice. You need to start noticing your automatic judgments and questioning them. At first, you'll probably catch them after the fact. You'll realize hours later that you got upset about something that wasn't worth being upset about. But gradually, you'll start catching them sooner and sooner, until eventually you can catch them in the moment and choose a more rational response. One practical exercise the Stoics used is morning reflection. Each morning, take a few minutes to think about what challenges you might face that day and how you want to respond to them. If you know you have a difficult meeting, think in advance about how you want to handle any criticism or conflict that might arise. If you know you'll be stuck in traffic, decide ahead of time that you won't let delays upset you. This kind of mental preparation makes it much easier to respond wisely when challenging situations actually occur. You've already thought through your values and priorities, so you don't have to figure them out in the heat of the moment. Another useful exercise is evening reflection. At the end of each day, review how you handled your emotions. When did you respond well? When did you let your emotions get the better of you? What can you learn from both your successes and your mistakes? This isn't about judging yourself harshly. It's about honestly examining your patterns so you can gradually improve them. The Stoics believed that philosophy should be a daily practice, not just an intellectual exercise. Now, let's address one of the most common objections to Stoic emotional philosophy. People often say, but emotions are natural. They're part of being human. Trying to control them is unhealthy. This objection is based on a misunderstanding of what the Stoics are proposing. They're not saying you should suppress your emotions or pretend they don't exist. They're saying you should understand where emotions come from so you can respond to them more skillfully. The Stoics actually distinguished between initial emotional impressions and sustained emotional reactions. When something bad happens, it's natural to have an immediate emotional response. If someone you love dies, you'll naturally feel a surge of grief. If someone threatens you, you'll naturally feel a flash of fear. The Stoics call these initial responses propathei, pre-emotions. They're automatic and unavoidable, and the Stoics didn't think you should try to prevent them. What you can control is what you do with these initial responses. Do you feed them with judgments that make them grow stronger and last longer? Or do you examine them rationally and let them pass through you without taking over your life? For example, if you feel a flash of anger when someone criticizes you, that's natural. But if you then tell yourself, they have no right to talk to me that way, I need to show them who's boss, this is completely unacceptable. That's you choosing to feed the anger with judgments that will make it grow. Alternatively, you could acknowledge the initial flash of anger and then think, okay, I feel angry right now. That's understandable. Criticism naturally triggers defensive reactions. But let me think about this more carefully. Is their criticism valid? If so, I can learn from it. If not, I don't need to take it personally. Either way, staying angry won't help me respond wisely. This second approach doesn't deny the emotional reaction, but it doesn't let the emotion drive your behavior either. You're acknowledging your humanity while also exercising your rational capacity. The third discipline is the discipline of assent, which is about controlling your judgments in real time. This is perhaps the most practical and immediately useful Stoic technique. Every time something happens that triggers an emotional reaction, you have a moment, sometimes just a split second, where you can choose what to think about it. Most people let this moment pass unconsciously. They automatically accept whatever judgment pops into their head first. But with practice, you can learn to catch this moment and examine your initial judgment before you accept it. You can ask yourself, is this judgment actually true? Is it helpful? Is it about something that's up to me or not up to me? For example, if someone is rude to you, your initial judgment might be, they're disrespecting me and I need to defend myself. But if you catch this judgment and examine it, you might realize, actually their rudeness says more about them than about me. My dignity doesn't depend on how they treat me. I can choose to respond with dignity regardless of their behavior. This doesn't mean you become a doormat. It means you respond from a place of conscious choice rather than automatic reaction. You might still choose to address their rudeness, but you'll do it from a place of strength rather than emotional reactivity. The key to developing this skill is practice. You need to start noticing your automatic judgments and questioning them. At first, you'll probably catch them after the fact. You'll realize hours later that you got upset about something that wasn't worth being upset about. But gradually, you'll start catching them sooner and sooner, until eventually you can catch them in the moment and choose a more rational response. One practical exercise the Stoics used is morning reflection. Each morning, take a few minutes to think about what challenges you might face that day and how you want to respond to them. If you know you have a difficult meeting, think in advance about how you want to handle any criticism or conflict that might arise. If you know you'll be stuck in traffic, decide ahead of time that you won't let delays upset you. This kind of mental preparation makes it much easier to respond wisely when challenging situations actually occur. You've already thought through your values and priorities, so you don't have to figure them out in the heat of the moment. Another useful exercise is evening reflection. At the end of each day, review how you handled your emotions. When did you respond well? When did you let your emotions get the better of you? What can you learn from both your successes and your mistakes? This isn't about judging yourself harshly. It's about honestly examining your patterns so you can gradually improve them. The Stoics believed that philosophy should be a daily practice, not just an intellectual exercise. Now, let's address one of the most common objections to Stoic emotional philosophy. People often say, but emotions are natural. They're part of being human. Trying to control them is unhealthy. This objection is based on a misunderstanding of what the Stoics are proposing. They're not saying you should suppress your emotions or pretend they don't exist. They're saying you should understand where emotions come from so you can respond to them more skillfully. The Stoics actually distinguished between initial emotional impressions and sustained emotional reactions. When something bad happens, it's natural to have an immediate emotional response. If someone you love dies, you'll naturally feel a surge of grief. If someone threatens you, you'll naturally feel a flash of fear. The Stoics call these initial responses propathii, pre-emotions. They're automatic and unavoidable, and the Stoics didn't think you should try to prevent them. What you can control is what you do with these initial responses. Do you feed them with judgments that make them grow stronger and last longer? Or do you examine them rationally and let them pass through you without taking over your life? For example, if you feel a flash of anger when someone criticizes you, that's natural. But if you then tell yourself, they have no right to talk to me that way, I need to show them who's boss, this is completely unacceptable. That's you choosing to feed the anger with judgments that will make it grow. Alternatively, you could acknowledge the initial flash of anger and then think, okay, I feel angry right now. That's understandable. Criticism naturally triggers defensive reactions. But let me think about this more carefully. Is their criticism valid? If so, I can learn from it. If not, I don't need to take it personally. Either way, staying angry won't help me respond wisely. This second approach doesn't deny the emotional reaction. But it doesn't let the emotion drive your behavior either. You're acknowledging your humanity while also exercising your rational capacity. The Stoics believed that this kind of emotional wisdom is what separates humans from animals. Animals are driven entirely by their immediate emotional reactions. Humans have the capacity to step back, examine their emotions, and choose how to respond. But this capacity has to be developed through practice. Think of it like physical fitness. Everyone has the capacity to become physically stronger, but it doesn't happen automatically. You have to exercise regularly, push yourself beyond your comfort zone, and gradually build your strength over time. Emotional fitness works the same way. Most people never develop their emotional fitness, so they remain at the mercy of whatever emotions happen to arise. They think this is just being human, but the Stoics would say it's actually being less than fully human. It's not using the rational capacity that makes us human in the first place. Now, let's get more specific about how to apply these principles to common emotional challenges. Let's start with anger, since it's one of the most destructive emotions and one that almost everyone struggles with. Anger typically arises when we judge that someone has wronged us and that they deserve punishment or retaliation. The judgment seems obvious in the moment. Of course you should be angry when someone treats you badly. But the Stoics would ask, what is your anger actually accomplishing? Does your anger change what already happened? No. The past is fixed. Does your anger make the other person behave better? Usually not. People rarely respond well to anger. Does your anger help you make better decisions about how to handle the situation? Almost never. Anger clouds judgment and leads to regrettable actions. So what is your anger actually doing? It's making you suffer. It's raising your blood pressure, ruining your mood, making you less pleasant to be around, and often leading you to do things you'll later regret. You're basically punishing yourself for someone else's bad behavior. The Stoic approach to anger is to examine the judgments that create it. When someone wrongs you, instead of automatically judging that they're bad and deserve punishment, you can ask, what might have led them to act this way? Are they ignorant of better behavior? Are they struggling with their own problems? Are they acting from their own emotional reactivity? This doesn't mean you excuse harmful behavior or fail to protect yourself. It means you understand that their behavior is about them, not about you. Their actions might affect you, but they don't define your worth or require an emotional response from you. Marcus Aurelius, who was literally the most powerful man in the world as Roman emperor, regularly reminded himself that people who wronged him were probably just ignorant of better behavior. He wrote, "Whenever you want to cheer yourself, consider the good qualities of your companions." This might seem naive, but think about it. When you act badly, is it usually because you're an evil person, or because you're stressed, confused, hurt, or just not thinking clearly? Most people most of the time are trying to do what they think is best, even when their actions are harmful. This perspective doesn't make you weak or passive. It actually makes you stronger because you're not wasting energy on emotional reactions that don't serve you. You can assess situations more clearly and respond more effectively when you're not blinded by anger. Let's move on to anxiety, which is probably the most common emotional challenge in our modern world. Anxiety is essentially fear about future events that may or may not happen. You're suffering now because of something that might happen later. The Stoic approach to anxiety involves several key insights. First, anxiety is always about externals, things that are not up to you. You're anxious about what other people might think, what might happen to your health, whether you'll get the job, whether your relationship will work out. All of these things are ultimately outside your direct control. Second, anxiety is based on the judgment that you need things to go a certain way in order to be okay. But the Stoics would ask, is this judgment actually true? Do you really need everyone to like you in order to be okay? Do you really need perfect health in order to live a meaningful life? Do you really need any particular outcome in order to maintain your dignity and worth as a person? When you examine these judgments carefully, you often find that they're much less solid than they seemed. You've probably already survived many situations that you were anxious about. You've probably discovered that you're more resilient than you thought. The Stoic remedy for anxiety is to focus on what is actually up to you and let go of everything else. Instead of worrying about whether you'll get the job, focus on preparing as well as you can and performing your best in the interview. Instead of worrying about what people think of you, focus on being someone worth respecting. This doesn't guarantee that external things will go your way, but it guarantees that you'll handle whatever happens with dignity and wisdom. And that's actually a much more reliable source of security than trying to control outcomes. The Stoics also practice an exercise called negative visualization, where they would deliberately imagine losing things they valued. This might seem morbid, but it serves several important purposes. First, it reminds you that everything external is temporary and could be lost at any time. This isn't meant to depress you, but to help you appreciate what you have while you have it, and to prepare psychologically for potential losses. Second, it helps you realize that you could handle these losses better than you think. When you really imagine losing your job, your health, or even your loved ones, you often discover that while it would be difficult, you would find a way to continue living meaningfully. Third, it puts current problems in perspective. If you can imagine handling major losses with equanimity, then smaller daily frustrations become much more manageable. One more emotion we should address is jealousy and envy, because they're so common and so destructive to relationships and peace of mind. Jealousy typically arises when we judge that someone else has something good that we lack, and that this somehow diminishes us. But this judgment is based on several questionable assumptions. First, it assumes that good things are scarce, that someone else having something means there's less available for you. Second, it assumes that your worth is relative to other people's circumstances rather than intrinsic to who you are. The Stoic approach to jealousy is to examine these assumptions. Is it actually true that someone else's success makes you less valuable? Is it true that there's only a limited amount of happiness, love, or success available in the world? When you think about it, other people's good fortune doesn't actually take anything away from you. If your friend gets a promotion, you still have exactly the same skills and opportunities you had before. If your neighbor has a beautiful garden, your own garden doesn't become any less beautiful. Moreover, jealousy is a completely unproductive emotion. It doesn't motivate you to improve your own situation. It just makes you resentful and bitter. It doesn't hurt the person you're jealous of. It only hurts you. The Stoic alternative to jealousy is to genuinely celebrate other people's good fortune. This isn't just about being a nice person, though it is that. It's about recognizing that in a rational universe, other people's happiness doesn't threaten your own. In fact, being surrounded by successful, happy people is actually beneficial to you. Happy people are more pleasant to be around, more generous, more creative, more inspiring. When you stop seeing other people as competitors and start seeing them as fellow human beings, your relationships become much more enjoyable and supportive. Now let's go deeper into some of the more sophisticated aspects of Stoic emotional philosophy. We've covered the basics of understanding emotions as judgments and the dichotomy of control, but there are some more advanced techniques and concepts that can really transform your relationship with your inner life. One of the most powerful Stoic practices is what they call the discipline of perception. This involves training yourself to see things as they actually are, rather than through the filter of your judgments, expectations, and emotional reactions. Most of the time, we don't see reality directly. We see our interpretation of reality. We see things through the lens of our past experiences, our fears, our desires, our cultural conditioning. And this filtered perception is what creates most of our emotional suffering. For example, when you see someone driving an expensive car, you don't just see a vehicle. You might see a symbol of success that makes you feel inadequate about your own car. Or you might see a display of materialism that makes you feel morally superior. Or you might see evidence that the world is unfair because some people have more than others. But none of these interpretations are actually contained in the external event. There's just a person driving a car. All the meaning, all the emotional charge comes from the story you tell yourself about what this means. The discipline of perception involves stripping away these added layers of interpretation and seeing things more clearly. Marcus Aurelius practiced this constantly. He would describe things in very plain, factual terms to avoid getting caught up in the emotional stories he might tell about them. For instance, instead of thinking, "That person is insulting me," he might think, "That person is making certain sounds with their mouth and moving air in patterns." Instead of, "I'm getting old and losing my vitality," he might think, "The atoms that compose my body are rearranging themselves according to natural processes." This might seem extreme, but it serves an important purpose. It helps you separate the bare facts of what's happening from the judgments you're adding to those facts. And it's the judgments, not the facts, that create emotional suffering. Let me give you a more practical example. Imagine you're scrolling through social media and you see that a friend of yours is on vacation in some exotic location, posting beautiful photos of beaches and sunsets. The natural tendency might be to feel envious, inadequate, or left out. But what's actually happening? Someone you know is moving their body around in a different geographical location and capturing light patterns with the device and sharing those patterns through an electronic network. They're having experiences and documenting them. When you strip away all the added meaning about success, happiness, what you should be doing with your life, what you're missing out on, what this says about your relative status, when you strip all that away, there's nothing there to be upset about. This doesn't mean you can't appreciate beautiful photos or be happy for your friend. It means you don't have to create suffering for yourself by adding interpretations that aren't actually contained in the situation. The discipline of perception is particularly useful for dealing with what we might call social emotions, the feelings that arise from our interactions with other people and our place in society. These include shame, embarrassment, the need for approval, fear of judgment, and the whole complex of emotions around status and reputation. Most people spend an enormous amount of mental energy worrying about what other people think of them. They carefully manage their image. They feel devastated by criticism. They seek constant validation. They compare themselves to others obsessively. But the Stoics realize that this whole endeavor is fundamentally misguided because it makes your emotional well-being depend on things that are completely outside your control. You can't control what other people think. You can influence it to some degree, but you can't control it. Moreover, most people most of the time aren't thinking about you at all. They're thinking about themselves, their own problems, their own concerns. The amount of attention you think people are paying to your actions, your appearance, your mistakes, is usually vastly overestimated. And even when people are thinking about you, their thoughts have no direct impact on your life unless you let them. If someone has a negative opinion of you but they don't express it and you don't know about it, it affects you exactly zero. It's only when you become aware of their opinion and then make judgments about what it means that it affects your emotional state. The Stoic approach to social emotions is to focus on your own judgment of your actions rather than other people's judgments. Instead of asking, "What will people think?" ask, "Is this the right thing to do?" Instead of seeking external validation, develop internal standards based on virtue and wisdom. This doesn't mean you become antisocial or stop caring about relationships. It means you base your relationships on genuine mutual respect and affection rather than on the need for approval or the fear of judgment. When you stop needing other people to validate you, you become much more attractive to them because you're more genuine, more confident, more stable. People are drawn to those who have a strong internal center, rather than those who are constantly seeking external validation. Let's talk about dealing with shame, which is one of the most destructive emotions because it's not just about what you've done, it's about who you are. Guilt says, "I did something bad." Shame says, "I am bad." Shame often develops early in life when children are made to feel that their fundamental self is unacceptable, and it can persist into adulthood, creating a constant background sense of inadequacy and unworthiness. The Stoic approach to shame is to recognize that it's based on a category error. You are not your actions. You are not your mistakes. You are not your past. You are the capacity for choice and reason that exists in this moment. When you do something you regret, the rational response is to acknowledge the mistake, learn from it, make amends if possible, and commit to doing better in the future. This is guilt, and it's actually useful because it motivates positive change. But shame adds an extra layer that's not useful. the judgment that your mistakes mean something fundamental about your worth as a person. This judgment doesn't motivate positive change. It actually inhibits it because it makes you want to hide and avoid rather than learn and grow. The Stoics believe that every person has an inherent capacity for wisdom and virtue. This capacity might be more developed in some people than others, and it might be temporarily obscured by ignorance or poor choices, but it's always there. Your fundamental worth doesn't depend on your performance. It depends on your humanity. This isn't just a nice sentiment, it's a practical truth. If you really believed that your worth was determined by your mistakes, then people who had made fewer mistakes would be inherently more valuable than people who had made more mistakes. But this doesn't match our actual experience of human value. Some of the most admirable people are those who have made significant mistakes and learned from them. Some of the most dangerous people are those who have never acknowledged their capacity for error and therefore never developed wisdom or humility. Your worth as a person is not a ledger where your good actions add points and your bad actions subtract them. It's more like a birthright that you carry regardless of your performance. This doesn't excuse bad behavior, but it does mean you can acknowledge your mistakes without destroying your sense of self. Now let's address one of the most challenging emotions from a Stoic perspective: grief. When someone you love dies, or when you lose something that was deeply important to you, how do you apply Stoic principles without becoming cold or inhuman? This is where many people misunderstand Stoicism. They think the Stoic response to loss would be to feel nothing, to be completely unmoved by the death of a loved one. But this misses the sophistication of Stoic thought. The Stoics distinguish between natural grief and irrational grief. Natural grief is the immediate emotional response to loss. It's the recognition that someone important is no longer in your life, and the sadness that naturally accompanies that recognition. This kind of grief is not only natural but appropriate. Irrational grief, on the other hand, is the additional suffering we create through our judgments about the loss. This includes believing that the person should not have died, that life is unfair because they're gone, that you can't be happy without them, that the loss is a catastrophe rather than a natural part of life. Seneca, who lost several children, wrote extensively about grief. He didn't advocate for emotional numbness. Instead, he argued for what we might call rational mourning, feeling the natural sadness of loss while also accepting the reality that everyone we love will eventually die, including ourselves. This acceptance doesn't minimize the sadness, but it prevents the sadness from being compounded by anger, denial, and despair. It allows you to grieve fully while also continuing to live meaningfully. The Stoic approach to grief involves several key insights. First, the person you loved would not want their death to destroy your life. If you truly love them, honoring that love means continuing to live in a way that would make them proud. Second, your love for them doesn't end when they die. Death changes the form of your relationship, but it doesn't erase the impact they had on your life or the lessons you learned from them. In a very real sense, the best parts of them continue to live in you. Third, grief is in part a celebration of love. You feel sad because you love deeply. This sadness is actually a testament to the beauty and meaning of your relationship. A life without the capacity for such love would be much poorer than a life that includes both love and loss. The Stoics also practiced an exercise that can be very helpful in dealing with grief, regularly contemplating the temporary nature of everything you love. This isn't meant to be morbid or to prevent you from loving fully. It's meant to help you appreciate what you have while you have it, and to prepare you psychologically for inevitable losses. When you really internalize the fact that everyone you love will someday die, including yourself, it changes how you relate to them. You become less likely to take them for granted. You become more present in your interactions with them. You become less concerned with minor irritations and more focused on what really matters. This contemplation also helps you realize that loss is not an aberration or a tragedy. It's simply how life works. Fighting against this reality only creates additional suffering on top of the natural sadness of loss. Let's move on to another challenging area: dealing with failure and setbacks. Most people have a very problematic relationship with failure. They see it as evidence of their inadequacy, as something shameful to be avoided at all costs, as a threat to their self-image and social standing. But the Stoics had a completely different perspective on failure. They saw it as information, as an opportunity for learning, as an inevitable part of any meaningful endeavor. Epictetus, who went from being a slave to being one of the most respected philosophers of his time, obviously had to overcome numerous setbacks and obstacles. The Stoic approach to failure begins with the recognition that you can't succeed at everything you attempt. If you're never failing, it means you're not attempting anything challenging or worthwhile. Failure is not the opposite of success. It's a necessary component of success. But beyond seeing failure as useful, the Stoics realize that your emotional reaction to failure is based on judgments that you can examine and change. When you fail at something, the natural tendency is to judge this as bad, as evidence of your limitations, as a reason to feel discouraged or ashamed. But what if you changed these judgments? What if instead of, "I failed, which means I'm inadequate," you thought, "I attempted something difficult and learned valuable information about what doesn't work"? What if instead of, "This setback means I should give up," you thought, "This obstacle is an opportunity to develop resilience and creative problem solving"? The external event, the failure, is the same in both cases. But your emotional response and your future actions will be completely different, depending on which interpretation you choose. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." This isn't just optimistic thinking. It's a recognition that obstacles force you to develop capabilities you wouldn't otherwise need. Think about the most capable, wise, and resilient people you know. Chances are, they're people who have faced significant challenges and learned from them. They didn't become wise by having everything go smoothly. They became wise by learning to handle difficulty with grace and intelligence. From this perspective, failure and setbacks are not punishments or evidence of inadequacy. They're part of the curriculum of life. They're how you develop the emotional and intellectual muscles that allow you to handle bigger challenges in the future. This doesn't mean you should seek out failure or be careless about your efforts. It means you should see failure as valuable feedback rather than as a judgment on your worth. It means you should be willing to risk failure in pursuit of meaningful goals, rather than playing it safe to protect your ego. The Stoics also emphasized the importance of focusing on effort rather than outcomes. You can control how much effort you put in, how thoughtfully you approach a problem, how much you learn from the experience. You can't control whether external circumstances will allow your efforts to succeed. When you make your satisfaction depend on effort rather than outcomes, you become much more resilient in the face of setbacks. You can feel good about giving your best effort, even when things don't work out as planned. This doesn't mean you don't care about results. It means you recognize that results depend on many factors beyond your control, while effort depends only on factors within your control. By focusing on what's up to you, you maintain your agency and your self-respect regardless of external outcomes. Now let's talk about one of the most pervasive sources of emotional suffering in modern life: the constant comparison with others. Social media has made this worse, but the tendency to measure ourselves against others is as old as humanity itself. The problem with comparison is that it makes your emotional well-being depend on your relative position rather than your absolute situation. Even if your life is objectively good, you can feel miserable if you believe others are doing better. Even if you're making progress, you can feel like a failure if others are progressing faster. The Stoics realize that this comparative mindset is fundamentally irrational. Your life is your life. Your challenges are your challenges. Your opportunities are your opportunities. Someone else's situation is completely irrelevant to how you should feel about your own. Moreover, you never have complete information about other people's lives. The person who seems to have everything together might be struggling with problems you know nothing about. The person who appears successful might be deeply unhappy. The person who seems confident might be full of self-doubt. Even if you did have complete information, it still wouldn't matter. Someone else being better or worse off than you doesn't change what you need to do with your own life. It doesn't change what choices are available to you. It doesn't change what actions will move you toward your goals. The Stoic alternative to comparison is to focus on your own progress over time. Instead of asking, "How am I doing compared to others?" ask, "How am I doing compared to who I was last year, or last month, or yesterday?" Instead of measuring yourself against external standards, measure yourself against your own potential. This doesn't mean you can't learn from others or be inspired by their achievements. It means you use others as sources of information and motivation rather than as standards for your self-worth. When you see someone who has achieved something you'd like to achieve, instead of feeling jealous or inadequate, you can ask, "What can I learn from their approach? What principles or practices contributed to their success? How can I apply these insights to my own situation?" This transforms other people from competitors into teachers. Their success becomes useful information rather than a source of emotional suffering. The Stoics also practiced what they called the view from above, imagining themselves from a cosmic perspective to put their concerns in proper context. When you imagine viewing your life from the perspective of the universe, or even just from the perspective of someone 100 years in the future, most of your daily worries become almost comically small. This isn't meant to make you feel insignificant, but to help you focus on what really matters. From a cosmic perspective, whether you have the latest iPhone or drive the newest car is completely irrelevant. What matters is whether you're living with wisdom, virtue, and genuine care for others. This perspective can be incredibly liberating. So much of our emotional suffering comes from taking temporary, superficial things too seriously. When you regularly practice the view from above, you naturally become less caught up in social competition and more focused on meaningful values. Let's address another common source of emotional suffering: the feeling that life should be fair. Many people become bitter and resentful because they observe that good things happen to bad people and bad things happen to good people. They think the universe is supposed to operate according to some moral accounting system where everyone gets what they deserve. But the Stoics recognize that this expectation is completely unrealistic. The universe doesn't operate according to human moral categories. Natural disasters don't check whether their victims are virtuous before striking. Diseases don't avoid good people and target bad people. Accidents don't respect moral boundaries. This doesn't mean morality is irrelevant. It means that moral behavior is its own reward, independent of external consequences. You act virtuously because it's the right thing to do, not because you expect the universe to reward you for it. When you let go of the expectation that life should be fair, you become much more able to handle injustice without becoming bitter. You can work to reduce injustice without being emotionally destroyed when your efforts don't immediately succeed. You can also appreciate good fortune without feeling guilty about it. If something good happens to you that you didn't necessarily earn, you can be grateful for it without feeling like you're somehow cheating the cosmic system. The Stoics believed that expecting fairness from an indifferent universe is like expecting the ocean to be dry or the sky to be solid. It's a category error that leads to constant frustration and disappointment. This insight is particularly relevant for dealing with trauma and abuse. If you've been mistreated by others, the natural tendency is to focus on the injustice of what happened to you. And the injustice is real. You didn't deserve to be harmed. But staying focused on the unfairness of your situation keeps you trapped in victim mentality. It makes your healing depend on getting acknowledgement, apology, or justice from people who may never provide these things. The Stoic approach is to acknowledge the reality of what happened without letting it define your entire life going forward. You can recognize that you were treated unjustly while also taking responsibility for how you respond to that treatment. This doesn't mean excusing the people who harmed you or pretending that their actions were acceptable. It means not allowing their actions to continue harming you by keeping you stuck in resentment and bitterness. Your healing and your future happiness don't depend on what they do, they depend on what you do, and what you do is always ultimately up to you. Now let's talk about dealing with regret, which is one of the most pointless and destructive emotions. Regret is suffering about past decisions that you can't change. You replay scenarios in your mind, wishing you had chosen differently, beating yourself up for mistakes, imagining how much better things would be if only you had acted differently. The Stoic approach to regret is straightforward. The past is fixed and unchangeable. No amount of mental energy can alter what has already happened. Every moment you spend regretting past decisions is a moment you're not spending making better decisions in the present. Moreover, Regret is based on the false assumption that you could have chosen differently given the same information, understanding, and emotional state you had at the time. But if you had been capable of choosing differently, you would have. You made the best decision you could with the resources you had available at the time. This doesn't mean all your past decisions were optimal. It means they were inevitable given your level of wisdom, information, and emotional development at the time. If you had possessed your current wisdom back then, you might have chosen differently, but you didn't possess that wisdom, and you couldn't have. The Stoic alternative to regret is to extract whatever lessons you can from past mistakes, and then focus entirely on making better choices going forward. Every mistake is valuable if you learn from it. Every mistake is pointless if you just use it to torture yourself with regret. When you catch yourself feeling regretful, ask, what can I learn from this situation that will help me make better decisions in the future? Once you've extracted the lesson, let go of the emotional charge around the past event. You've gotten the value from it. There's no benefit to continuing to suffer about it. The Stoics also emphasize the importance of self-forgiveness. If you wouldn't condemn a friend for making the same mistake in the same circumstances, why would you condemn yourself? You're human, which means you're inherently fallible. Making mistakes is part of the human condition, not evidence of your unique inadequacy. This brings us to one of the deepest insights of Stoic philosophy, the difference between what you are and what you do. Your actions flow from your character, but they're not identical to your character. Your character can change and develop over time as you gain wisdom and experience. When you identify completely with your actions, mistakes become threats to your entire sense of self. When you recognize that you are the one who chooses and acts, but you're not identical to any particular choice or action, mistakes become opportunities for growth rather than evidence of failure. This perspective is incredibly liberating because it means you're never trapped by your past. No matter what you've done, you always have the capacity to choose differently going forward. Your past informs your present, but it doesn't determine it. The Stoics believed that this capacity for choice and change is what makes humans distinctively human. Animals are largely determined by their instincts and conditioning. Humans have the ability to step back, reflect on their patterns, and consciously choose to develop in new directions. But this capacity has to be exercised consciously and regularly. If you don't actively work on your character development, you'll tend to repeat the same patterns indefinitely. Personal growth doesn't happen automatically. It requires deliberate effort and attention. This is why the Stoics emphasize daily philosophical practice. They didn't see philosophy as an abstract intellectual exercise, but as a practical discipline for developing wisdom and emotional resilience. They believed that philosophy should change how you live, not just how you think. Every day presents opportunities to practice Stoic principles. Every challenging emotion is a chance to examine your judgments and choose more rational responses. Every setback is an opportunity to practice resilience. Every interaction with others is a chance to practice virtue. The goal isn't to become perfect. The Stoics recognize that perfect wisdom is probably impossible for humans. The goal is to make consistent progress, to become a little wiser and more resilient each day, to gradually free yourself from the emotional patterns that create unnecessary suffering. This progress isn't always linear. You'll have days when you handle things beautifully, and days when you fall back into old patterns. This is normal and expected. The key is to keep practicing, to keep learning from your experiences, to keep applying Stoic insights to your daily life. Over time, you'll notice that things that used to upset you for hours or days might only bother you for minutes. Situations that used to send you into emotional tailspins become manageable challenges. Your emotional life becomes more stable and peaceful, not because your external circumstances become perfect, but because you've developed the internal resources to handle whatever arises with wisdom and grace. Now let's dive deep into the practical implementation of these Stoic principles in our modern world. Because understanding the theory is one thing, but actually applying it when you're stuck in traffic, dealing with a difficult boss, or scrolling through social media at 2 a.m. is something entirely different. The first thing you need to understand about practicing Stoicism in daily life is that it's not about becoming emotionally numb or disconnected from the world. It's about becoming more skillful in your responses to life's challenges. It's about developing what we might call emotional intelligence on steroids. Let's start with one of the most common modern sources of emotional turbulence: social media. Every day, millions of people log onto platforms that are specifically designed to trigger emotional reactions. The algorithms that power these platforms have learned that anger, envy, outrage, and anxiety keep people engaged much more effectively than contentment and peace. When you scroll through your feed, you're bombarded with carefully curated highlight reels of other people's lives, designed to make you feel like you're missing out. You see political posts designed to make you angry at people who disagree with you. You see advertisements designed to make you feel inadequate about your appearance, your possessions, your lifestyle. You see news stories selected specifically because they trigger strong emotional responses. The Stoic approach to social media isn't necessarily to avoid it entirely, although that might be the wisest choice for some people. It's to use it consciously, with full awareness of what's happening in your mind as you engage with it. Before you open any social media app, you can set an intention. I'm going to look at this content, and I'm going to notice when it triggers judgments that create emotional reactions. I'm going to practice seeing through these reactions to the bare facts of what's actually happening. When you see someone's vacation photos, you can notice if you start to feel envious or inadequate. Then you can remind yourself, this person is sharing a moment from their life. This has nothing to do with my life or my worth. I can appreciate their joy without diminishing my own. When you see a political post that makes you angry, you can pause and ask, what judgment am I making that creates this anger? Is this anger helping me understand the issue better or respond more wisely? Or is it just making me more agitated and polarized? When you see an advertisement that makes you feel like you need to buy something, you can recognize this is designed to create a feeling of lack or inadequacy. My actual needs and wants haven't changed in the last 30 seconds. This feeling is artificially manufactured. The key is to maintain what the Stoics called prosos, continuous attention to your inner state. You're not trying to suppress your reactions. You're trying to observe them clearly and respond to them rationally rather than automatically. This practice of conscious engagement extends to all forms of media consumption. The news, entertainment, even conversations with friends and family. All of these can trigger automatic emotional reactions based on unconscious judgments. The Stoics would say that most of what we call staying informed is actually just subjecting ourselves to a constant stream of information about things we can't control, which naturally leads to anxiety, anger, and despair. They would ask, what do you actually need to know to live your life well? How much of the information you consume actually helps you make better decisions? This doesn't mean becoming ignorant or disengaged from the world. It means being more selective about what you pay attention to, and more conscious about how you process information. It means distinguishing between what you need to know to act wisely and what you're consuming out of habit, boredom, or emotional addiction. Let's move on to relationships, which are probably the most complex area for applying Stoic principles. Relationships involve other people, who by definition are externals, things not under your direct control. Yet relationships are also one of the most important sources of meaning and happiness in life. The Stoic approach to relationships begins with a fundamental shift in perspective. Instead of trying to get your needs met through other people, you focus on what you can give to relationships. Instead of trying to control how others behave, you focus on how you choose to behave. This doesn't mean becoming a doormat or accepting mistreatment. It means recognizing that trying to control other people is both impossible and disrespectful. It means taking full responsibility for your half of every relationship while allowing others to take responsibility for their half. For example, if your partner is consistently late, the natural tendency might be to get angry, to lecture them about respect and consideration, to try to make them feel guilty so they'll change their behavior. But all of these responses are attempts to control something that's not up to you. The Stoic response would be to ask, how do I want to handle the reality that this person is often late? Do I want to adjust my expectations and plans accordingly? Do I want to have a calm conversation about how their lateness affects me? Do I want to reconsider whether this relationship is compatible with my values and needs? Notice that all of these responses focus on what you can control: your expectations, your communication, your choices about the relationship. You're not trying to force the other person to change. You're deciding how to respond wisely to who they actually are. This approach actually tends to be much more effective at creating positive change in relationships because it reduces defensiveness and power struggles. When you stop trying to control someone, they're more likely to listen to your perspective and consider changing their behavior voluntarily. But even if they don't change, you maintain your peace of mind and your self-respect because your emotional well-being doesn't depend on their choices. This principle applies to all types of relationships, with family members, friends, colleagues, romantic partners. The people in your life are who they are. They have their own personalities, their own problems, their own ways of seeing the world. You can influence them to some degree through your own behavior, but you can't control them. The Stoic approach is to love people as they are, while also maintaining appropriate boundaries. You can care deeply about someone while also protecting yourself from the negative effects of their choices. You can wish the best for someone while also recognizing that their path in life might be different from what you would choose for them. This perspective is particularly important when dealing with difficult family members. Many people feel trapped in dysfunctional family dynamics because they believe they have to accept mistreatment in the name of love and loyalty. But the Stoics would say that true love sometimes requires setting firm boundaries. You can love someone and still refuse to engage with their drama. You can care about someone and still decline to enable their destructive behavior. You can maintain family connections while also protecting your own mental health and well-being. The key is to act from a place of wisdom and virtue rather than from emotional reactivity. When you set boundaries from a place of anger or resentment, they often become weapons rather than protective measures. When you set boundaries from a place of clarity and self-respect, they serve their intended purpose of maintaining healthy relationships. Now let's talk about applying Stoic principles in professional settings, which present their own unique challenges. Work involves hierarchies, politics, competition, deadlines, and often significant financial pressure, all of which can trigger intense emotional reactions. One of the most common sources of workplace stress is feeling undervalued or unrecognized. You work hard, you produce good results, but your boss doesn't seem to notice or appreciate your efforts. Or maybe someone else gets credit for your ideas. Or maybe you get passed over for a promotion you felt you deserved. The natural emotional response is to feel angry, resentful, or discouraged. You might start to question your own worth or plot revenge against those who wronged you or begin looking for ways to prove your value to people who seem blind to it. But the Stoic approach would be to step back and examine what's actually happening. Your boss's recognition is an external, something not under your direct control. Your colleague's behavior is external. Even the promotion is external, since it depends on many factors beyond your performance. What is under your control? The quality of your work, your professionalism, your integrity, your response to setbacks, your decisions about how to develop your skills and advance your career. When you focus on what's up to you, you often find that you have more power and options than you initially realized. Maybe you can have a direct conversation with your boss about your career goals. Maybe you can document your contributions more effectively. Maybe you can seek mentorship or feedback to improve your performance. Maybe you can start developing skills that will make you more valuable in your current role or more attractive to other employers. All of these responses focus your energy on things you can actually influence rather than on resentment about things you can't control. They also tend to be much more effective at actually improving your situation. The Stoics also understood that office politics and workplace conflicts are inevitable in any organization with more than one person. People have different personalities, different priorities, different communication styles. They compete for limited resources and recognition. They sometimes act from ego, fear, or narrow self-interest. Instead of being shocked or offended when these dynamics emerge, the Stoic practitioner expects them and prepares for them. You can't prevent office politics, but you can choose how to engage with them. The Stoic approach is to maintain your own integrity, while also being strategically wise about how you navigate organizational dynamics. You don't have to be naive or passive in the face of difficult colleagues or unfair treatment. You can advocate for yourself and your team. You can build alliances and seek mentorship. You can document important communications and protect yourself from false accusations. But you do all of this from a place of rational calculation rather than emotional reactivity. You're playing chess, not just reacting impulsively to whatever move your opponent makes last. This perspective is particularly valuable when dealing with difficult bosses or colleagues. Every workplace has people who are incompetent, unreasonable, manipulative, or just plain unpleasant. You can't change these people, but you can choose how to interact with them. Sometimes the wisest approach is to minimize contact and focus on your own work. Sometimes it's to build alliances with others who share your perspective. Sometimes it's to document problematic behavior so you can protect yourself if necessary. Sometimes it's to look for opportunities to transfer to a different team or find a new job entirely. The key is to make these decisions from a place of clarity rather than emotion. When you're constantly angry or frustrated with difficult people, you can't think strategically about how to handle them. You're just reacting, which usually makes the situation worse. Let's talk about money and financial stress, which is a major source of emotional suffering for many people. Money represents security, status, freedom, and options, or the lack thereof. Financial problems can trigger deep fears about survival, worthiness, and social standing. The Stoic approach to money begins with distinguishing between needs and wants. How much money do you actually need to live a good life? How much of your financial stress comes from genuine necessities, and how much comes from desires for things that aren't actually necessary? This isn't about embracing poverty or denying yourself all pleasures. It's about being honest about what you actually need versus what you think you need based on social conditioning, advertising, or comparison with others. Many people work themselves into states of constant stress and anxiety trying to afford lifestyles that don't actually make them happier. They sacrifice their health, their relationships, their peace of mind in pursuit of financial goals that are based more on external expectations than on their own authentic values. The Stoics would ask, what is wealth actually for? Is it an end in itself, or is it a means to something else? If it's a means, what is it a means to? And are there other ways to achieve those same ends? If you want financial security, how much money do you actually need to feel secure? If you want freedom, does that require being wealthy, or does it require living below your means, regardless of your income level? If you want to be able to help others, does that require being rich, or does it require being generous with whatever resources you have? When you clarify your actual values and priorities, you often find that you need less money than you thought to live according to those values. This doesn't solve all financial problems, but it often reduces financial anxiety significantly. The Stoics also emphasize the importance of accepting financial setbacks without letting them destroy your peace of mind. Money comes and goes. Investments sometimes fail. Jobs are lost. Businesses struggle. Economic conditions change. If your emotional well-being depends entirely on your financial status, you're setting yourself up for constant instability. This doesn't mean being careless with money or not planning for the future. It means recognizing that financial security is partly an illusion. There are no guarantees in economic life, just as there are no guarantees in any other area of life. The most reliable source of security is your own resourcefulness, adaptability, and resilience. If you know that you can handle financial setbacks with wisdom and grace, you become less anxious about the possibility of such setbacks. Now, let's discuss one of the most challenging applications of Stoic philosophy: dealing with physical illness and aging. These are areas where the gap between what we can control and what we can't becomes starkly apparent. When you're dealing with serious illness, many of the normal strategies for happiness and success become irrelevant. You can't just work harder or think more positively to make cancer go away. You can't use willpower to reverse the effects of aging. You're confronted directly with the limitations of human control. The Stoic approach to illness begins with accepting the reality of what's happening to your body while focusing on what remains under your control. You can't control whether you get sick, but you can control how you respond to being sick. You can choose to follow medical advice or ignore it. You can choose to maintain your relationships and continue contributing to the lives of others, or you can become bitter and withdraw from the world. You can choose to find meaning and even joy within the constraints of illness, or you can focus entirely on what you've lost. This doesn't mean pretending that illness is pleasant or that you should be grateful for suffering. It means recognizing that even in very difficult circumstances, you still have choices about how to live. Some of the most inspiring examples of human dignity and wisdom come from people who have faced serious illness or disability with grace and courage. They remind us that our essential humanity doesn't depend on our physical capabilities or our health status. The Stoics believed that the capacity for virtue and wisdom exists regardless of external circumstances. A person can be wise and virtuous, whether they're healthy or sick, young or old, rich or poor. The form that virtue takes might change based on circumstances, but the capacity itself remains. For someone dealing with chronic pain, virtue might mean finding ways to be helpful and kind to others despite their own suffering. For someone facing terminal illness, virtue might mean using their remaining time to strengthen relationships and share whatever wisdom they've gained. The Stoic practice of negative visualization can be particularly helpful in this context. By regularly imagining the loss of your health, you develop both appreciation for your current capabilities and psychological preparation for potential limitations. This doesn't mean becoming morbid or anxious about health problems. It means recognizing that health is a temporary condition that all of us will eventually lose, and that a life well lived doesn't depend on maintaining perfect health indefinitely. Let's explore the relationship between emotions and decision-making, which is crucial for understanding how Stoic practice actually improves your life in practical terms. Most people don't realize how much their emotional states influence their choices, often in ways that work against their own long-term interests. When you're angry, you're much more likely to make decisions that you'll later regret. When you're anxious, you tend to avoid opportunities that could benefit you. When you're depressed, you often neglect activities that would improve your situation. When you're envious, you focus on what others have rather than on developing your own capabilities. Emotional reactions also tend to narrow your thinking. When you're upset, you can usually only see a few options, and they're usually not the best options. When you're calm and centered, you can think more creatively and see possibilities that weren't apparent when you were emotionally reactive. The Stoic practice of emotional regulation isn't just about feeling better in the moment, though it certainly does that. It's about making better decisions over time. When you're not constantly buffeted by emotional storms, you can think more clearly, plan more effectively, and act more consistently with your values. This has compound effects over months and years. Better decisions lead to better outcomes, which make it easier to make even better decisions in the future. Conversely, poor emotional regulation leads to poor decisions, which create more problems, which trigger more emotional reactivity, which leads to even worse decisions. The Stoics understood that emotions and reason aren't separate systems that sometimes conflict with each other. They're interconnected aspects of human psychology. Your emotions are generated by your judgments, and your judgments are influenced by your emotional state. This is why Stoic practice focuses so much on examining and refining your judgments. When you learn to think more clearly about what's happening in your life, your emotional responses naturally become more appropriate and helpful. For example, if you can train yourself to see criticism as information rather than as an attack, you'll naturally feel less defensive when you receive feedback. This makes it easier to learn from the criticism, which makes you more effective at whatever you're doing, which builds genuine confidence over time. Or, if you can learn to see setbacks as learning opportunities rather than as evidence of your inadequacy, you'll naturally feel less discouraged when things don't go as planned. This makes it easier to persist through difficulties and find creative solutions, which increases your likelihood of eventual success. The emotional benefits of Stoic practice and the practical benefits are really the same thing viewed from different angles. You feel better because you're thinking more clearly, and you get better results because you're not sabotaging yourself with emotional reactivity. Now, let's discuss what might be called advanced Stoic practices, techniques that go beyond basic emotional regulation to develop deeper wisdom and resilience. These are practices that seasoned Stoics use to continue growing throughout their lives. One of the most powerful advanced practices is what Marcus Aurelius called the view from above. This involves regularly imagining yourself from a cosmic perspective, seeing your life, your problems, and your concerns from the viewpoint of someone observing from space, or from 100 years in the future, or from the perspective of the universe itself. This practice serves several purposes. First, it puts your daily concerns in proper perspective. Things that seem enormously important when you're caught up in them often appear much less significant when viewed from a broader vantage point. Second, it connects you to something larger than your immediate personal concerns. When you regularly contemplate your place in the larger cosmos, you naturally become less self-centered and more aware of your connection to the rest of humanity and to the natural world. Third, it cultivates what philosophers call the philosophical attitude, a stance of curiosity, wonder, and acceptance toward existence itself. Instead of being constantly frustrated that life doesn't match your preferences, you begin to appreciate the sheer improbability and beauty of conscious existence in a vast universe. Another advanced practice is what we might call virtue journaling, regularly reflecting on how well you're embodying the cardinal virtues of wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance in your daily life. This isn't about judging yourself harshly, but about honestly assessing your character development and identifying areas for growth. You might ask yourself questions like, when did I act wisely today? And when did I act foolishly? How did I contribute to justice or fairness in my interactions with others? When did I show courage? And when did I avoid challenges that I should have faced? How well did I practice moderation and self-discipline? Over time, this kind of reflection helps you develop a clearer sense of your own character patterns and a more intentional approach to personal development. You begin to see virtue not as abstract ideals, but as practical skills that you can develop through conscious effort. A third advanced practice is what might be called philosophical friendship, seeking out relationships with others who are also interested in wisdom and character development. The Stoics believe that philosophical development happens best in community with others who share similar values and commitments. This doesn't mean surrounding yourself only with people who agree with you about everything, or becoming preachy about Stoicism with your friends and family. It means finding ways to connect with others around deep questions about how to live well. You might join a philosophy discussion group, participate in online communities focused on practical wisdom, or simply have more meaningful conversations with people in your existing social network. The key is to move beyond surface-level interactions toward discussions that help everyone involved think more deeply about their values and choices. Another advanced practice is developing what the Stoics called sympathia, the recognition that all humans are interconnected and that individual well-being is inseparable from collective well-being. This isn't just a nice sentiment. It's a practical insight that changes how you approach relationships and social responsibility. When you really understand that your own flourishing depends partly on the flourishing of others, you naturally become more generous, more patient, more willing to contribute to the common good. You begin to see helping others not as a sacrifice, but as an investment in the kind of world you want to live in. This perspective is particularly important in our highly individualistic culture, which often encourages people to pursue their own interests without considering the broader social consequences. The Stoics understood that humans are inherently social beings, and that attempts to find happiness through purely individual pursuits are ultimately self-defeating. Let's explore the concept of preferred indifference, which is one of the most nuanced and often misunderstood aspects of Stoic philosophy. The Stoics taught that only virtue is truly good, and only vice is truly bad. Everything else, health, wealth, reputation, success, even life itself, is technically indifferent from the perspective of human flourishing. But this doesn't mean that all external things are equally desirable, or that you should be completely passive about your circumstances. The Stoics distinguished between preferred indifference and dispreferred indifference. Health is better than sickness, all else being equal. Prosperity is better than poverty. Good relationships are better than bad relationships. A good reputation is better than a bad reputation. These are preferred indifference, things that are generally beneficial and worth pursuing, but not absolutely necessary for human flourishing. The key insight is that your happiness and worth as a person don't depend on having these things. You can live a meaningful, virtuous life whether you're healthy or sick, rich or poor, celebrated or unknown. But you can still reasonably prefer health to sickness and work to maintain your health within the limits of what's possible. This distinction allows Stoics to be fully engaged with life while maintaining emotional equilibrium. You can care about your career without being devastated if you lose your job. You can work to maintain your health without being crushed if you develop a serious illness. You can invest in relationships without being destroyed if some relationships end. This balanced approach is often more sustainable than either complete detachment or total emotional investment in externals. It allows you to pursue meaningful goals while maintaining the resilience to handle setbacks gracefully. The concept of preferred indifference also helps explain how Stoics can be socially engaged and politically active without being emotionally dependent on particular outcomes. You can work for justice because justice is virtuous, not because you expect your efforts to immediately transform society. You can care about environmental protection because caring for the common good is virtuous, not because you expect to single-handedly solve climate change. You can be involved in politics because civic engagement is virtuous, not because you expect your preferred candidates to always win. This approach allows for sustained commitment to important causes, without the burnout and despair that often affect people whose emotional well-being depends entirely on external results. Now let's address one of the most common misconceptions about Stoicism, the idea that it makes people passive or resigned to bad situations. Critics often argue that if you accept everything that happens, you'll never work to improve anything. But this misunderstands the Stoic teaching about acceptance. The Stoics don't advocate for accepting injustice, mistreatment, or preventable suffering. They advocate for accepting reality as it currently is, so that you can respond to it effectively. There's a huge difference between these two types of acceptance. If you refuse to accept that a problem exists, you can't solve it. If you spend all your energy being angry that the problem exists, you have less energy available for actually addressing it. The Stoic approach is to accept current reality completely, while also working to improve future reality wherever possible. You accept that your relationship has problems, so that you can work on fixing them. You accept that your community faces challenges, so that you can contribute to solutions. You accept that you have personal flaws, so that you can work on developing your character. This kind of acceptance is actually the foundation of effective action, not an alternative to it. When you stop wasting energy on denial, blame, and emotional resistance to what's already happened, you have much more energy available for constructive response. The Stoics also distinguished between what they called the discipline of desire and the discipline of action. The discipline of desire involves accepting what you cannot change. The discipline of action involves changing what you can change. Both are necessary for a wise and effective life. Many people get these backwards. They waste enormous energy trying to change things they can't control, other people's behavior, past events, external circumstances, while neglecting things they can control, their own responses, their skill development, their preparation for future challenges. The Stoic practitioner becomes very skilled at quickly assessing what can and cannot be changed in any given situation, and then focusing their energy accordingly. This makes them much more effective at actually creating positive change in their lives and in the world. Let's discuss the role of community and social connection in Stoic practice. While Stoicism emphasizes personal responsibility and inner strength, it's not an individualistic philosophy. The Stoics believed deeply in human interconnectedness and social obligation. Marcus Aurelius, despite having enormous political power, regularly reminded himself that he existed to serve others, and that his own well-being was inseparable from the well-being of the Roman Empire. Epictetus taught his students that they had obligations to their families, their communities, and to humanity as a whole. Modern applications of Stoicism need to include this social dimension. Your emotional regulation and personal resilience aren't just for your own benefit. They make you a better friend, family member, colleague, and citizen. When you're not constantly reactive and emotionally volatile, you're more pleasant to be around. When you're not always seeking validation or being defensive, you can listen better and contribute more meaningfully to conversations. When you're not ruled by envy or resentment, you can genuinely celebrate others' successes and support them during difficulties. Stoic practice also develops what we might call emotional leadership, the ability to remain calm and rational during times of stress or crisis, which helps others do the same. In families, workplaces, and communities, people naturally look to those who demonstrate emotional stability and wisdom. This doesn't mean becoming emotionally distant or failing to empathize with others' struggles. It means being able to offer genuine support without being overwhelmed by others' emotions or trying to fix problems that aren't yours to fix. The Stoic practitioner learns to be fully present with others' pain without taking on that pain as their own. They can offer comfort, practical help, and wise counsel without becoming emotionally destabilized by every crisis or conflict they encounter. This kind of emotional stability is particularly valuable during collective challenges, economic downturns, natural disasters, political upheavals, or global pandemics. When many people are panicking or despair, those who can maintain their equanimity and think clearly become valuable resources for their communities. Let's explore the integration of Stoic practice with other philosophical and spiritual traditions. Stoicism isn't a complete worldview that answers every question about existence. It's more like a practical methodology for developing wisdom and resilience that can complement other approaches to meaning and purpose. Many people find that Stoic practices enhance their engagement with religious or spiritual traditions rather than replacing them. The Stoic emphasis on virtue, service to others, and acceptance of what can't be changed aligns well with the core teachings of most major wisdom traditions. Stoicism can also complement therapeutic approaches to mental health. The Stoic practice of examining and challenging automatic thoughts is very similar to cognitive behavioral therapy techniques. The Stoic emphasis on focusing on what you can control aligns with acceptance-based therapies like ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy. However, Stoicism isn't a substitute for professional mental health treatment when that's needed. If you're dealing with severe depression, anxiety, trauma, or other serious psychological challenges, Stoic philosophy can be a helpful supplement to professional care, but it shouldn't be your only resource. The key is to approach Stoicism as one valuable tool among many for developing psychological resilience and wisdom, rather than as a complete solution to all of life's challenges. Let's address the question of how to begin implementing Stoic practices in your daily life. The prospect of changing your entire relationship to emotions and external events can seem overwhelming, but like any skill development, it's best approached gradually and systematically. Start with small, manageable practices that you can integrate into your existing routine. You might begin with just 5 minutes of morning reflection, reviewing the day ahead, and setting intentions about how you want to respond to likely challenges. Or you might start with evening reflection, spending a few minutes before bed reviewing how you handled your emotions during the day. What triggered strong reactions? How did you respond? What did you learn? What would you do differently next time? Another good starting practice is to choose one recurring source of irritation, maybe traffic, or waiting in lines, or dealing with a particular difficult person, and use it as a regular opportunity to practice Stoic principles. Instead of automatically becoming frustrated, you can use these situations as training ground for patience and acceptance. You can also begin incorporating Stoic reading into your routine. The writings of Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and Seneca are all available in modern translations and can provide daily inspiration and guidance. Even reading 1 or 2 passages each day can help reinforce Stoic insights and keep them present in your mind. The key is consistency rather than intensity. It's better to practice a little bit every day than to have occasional intense philosophical sessions. Stoicism is about developing habits of thought and response that become automatic over time. You should also expect that progress will be gradual and nonlinear. You'll have days when you apply Stoic principles beautifully and feel proud of your emotional regulation. You'll also have days when you fall back into old patterns of reactivity and feel like you haven't learned anything. This is completely normal and expected. Character development takes time, and setbacks are part of the process. The goal isn't to become perfect immediately, but to become gradually more wise and resilient over months and years of consistent practice. As you develop more skill with basic Stoic practices, You can gradually incorporate more advanced techniques like negative visualization, the view from above, and virtue journaling. But don't try to do everything at once. Build your foundation slowly and solidly. Let's conclude with a reflection on what emotional mastery actually means from a Stoic perspective. It's not about never feeling anything or becoming an emotionless robot. It's about developing the wisdom to respond to your emotions skillfully, rather than being controlled by them. The emotionally mature person feels the full range of human emotions but isn't dominated by them. They can be sad without becoming depressed, angry without becoming vengeful, afraid without becoming paralyzed, and joyful without becoming reckless. They understand that emotions are information about their judgments and values, not commands that must be obeyed. They can feel an emotion, understand where it's coming from, and then choose how to respond based on wisdom rather than impulse. This kind of emotional mastery isn't just beneficial for the individual, it's a gift to everyone around them. The person who has learned to regulate their emotions becomes a source of stability and wisdom for their family, friends, and community. They can remain calm during crises, think clearly during conflicts, and maintain hope during difficult times. They become the kind of person others turn to for guidance and support, not because they never face challenges, but because they've learned to face challenges with grace and intelligence. This is the ultimate goal of Stoic practice, not just personal happiness or success, but the development of character that benefits the entire human community. When you master your emotions, you're not just improving your own life. You're contributing to the creation of a more rational, peaceful, and virtuous world. The ancient Stoics believed that philosophy should be practical, that it should change how you live, not just how you think. The test of whether you've truly understood Stoic principles isn't whether you can explain them intellectually, but whether you can apply them when you're stuck in traffic, dealing with criticism, facing financial pressure, or navigating relationship conflicts. Every day presents countless opportunities to practice emotional wisdom. Every challenging emotion is a chance to examine your judgments and choose more rational responses. Every setback is an opportunity to practice resilience. Every interaction with others is a chance to practice virtue. The goal isn't to become perfect. The Stoics themselves acknowledge that perfect wisdom is probably impossible for humans. The goal is to make consistent progress, to become a little wiser and more resilient each day, to gradually free yourself from the emotional patterns that create unnecessary suffering. Over time, you'll notice that things that used to upset you for hours or days might only bother you for minutes. Situations that used to send you into emotional tailspins become manageable challenges. Your emotional life becomes more stable and peaceful, not because your external circumstances become perfect, but because you've developed the internal resources to handle whatever arises with wisdom and grace. This is the promise of Stoic philosophy, not a life without problems or emotions, but a life where problems become opportunities for growth and emotions become sources of information rather than sources of suffering. It's a path toward true freedom, not the freedom to control everything around you, but the freedom to choose your response to whatever life brings. The ancient Stoics discovered something profound about human nature, that we have much more control over our experience of life than we usually realize, and that this control comes not from manipulating external circumstances, but from developing internal wisdom. This insight is just as relevant today as it was 2,000 years ago, and it's available to anyone willing to put in the effort to develop it. Your emotions don't have to control your life. You can learn to work with them skillfully, to respond to them wisely, to use them as tools for understanding yourself and navigating the world more effectively. This is perhaps the most important skill you can develop, not just for your own well-being, but for your ability to contribute positively to the lives of everyone around you. The journey toward emotional mastery begins with a single step: the recognition that your emotional reactions are based on judgments that you can examine and change. From that simple insight flows a lifetime of growth, wisdom, and increasing freedom from unnecessary suffering. The ancient Stoics showed us the way. Now it's up to each of us to walk the path.